All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this Balanced Scorecard Institute webinar, the top 8 strategic management horror stories and how to avoid them. In the spirit of Halloween, which we are celebrating here in the U.S. next week, today we're going to be gathering around the electronic campfire and tell some scary stories about some of the more horrifying balanced scorecard and strategic planning and management situations we've encountered. These stories are all based on real situations that my co-host, Gail Perry, or I have observed over the many years working with strategic planning and management clients all over the world. Before we get started, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is David Wilsey, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Balanced Scorecard Institute. I have an unusual background for a strategic management consultant. I began as a musician, actually got a degree in music education, and then I quickly shifted to manufacturing, where I worked in the piston business. I designed race car pistons for almost a decade. That's where I first experienced some of the challenges of strategy management that we'll talk about today. About almost 9 years ago, after completing graduate school, I began working at the Balanced Scorecard Institute as a full-time trainer and consultant, and quickly discovered that many organizations experience the same challenges. I've since consulted with dozens of clients year in and year out, and have helped many organizations avoid the stumbling blocks that we will talk about here today. I'm joined today by a colleague, Gail Perry. Gail, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone. I'm glad to see so many of you on this webinar. We actually have a capacity crowd of 500. I've spent my 20-year career in management consulting, and I too have experienced deeply frustrating challenges when trying to help clients with strategic transformation initiatives. I'm an engineer by training, and at first I thought the problem was that I didn't have a business background, so I went back and got my MBA. It took a few more hard knocks for me to realize that I was running up against the same problems over and over, and it had nothing to do with my education. There was a pattern to the failures, and it gives me great pleasure now to help my clients navigate around the common pitfalls that cause strategic management efforts to fail, and I'm delighted to share this knowledge with you today. One quick announcement that I'd like to add is that I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas, and I've been experiencing some technical difficulties this morning. We tried everything short of ripping the floorboards out of my office to find the faulty wire, so if my voice crackles, please bear with us. David will let me know if I need to pause for a second and let the system settle, and I apologize in advance. I'm guessing many of the folks on the line have experienced struggles similar to what we have. Before we get started, let's get some quick feedback. Can everyone please open the questions panel on your GoToWebinar interface and share with us some of the struggles you have encountered with strategic management?
So what are some of the challenges you face? What are some of the problems that you run into?
Here we go. It's starting to come in now.
There we go. Wow, here they go.
Oh my gosh.
Here are some challenges.
Wow. I'm just going to slow this down enough to read it. CEOs want strategy development to be quick. Lack of realistic resourcing. Lack of time for management. Strategic plans is shelfware. Leaders that don't want to communicate strategy. VP doing something different than the agreed upon strategy. Oh, that's a nightmare. Wow. They're going so fast, David. I'm having trouble.
Yeah, making the business case for anything, maintaining alignment as we cascade, lack of realistic resourcing, leadership that doesn't want to communicate strategy. CEOs want strategy development to be quick. Lot about buy-in. A lot of the same challenges, aren't they?
They are.
How to begin the process. Lack of time for management.
Follow-up, communication, metrics.
VP doing something different than agreed upon in the strategy. Not linked to HR.
Thank you, guys. Wow.
Yeah, excellent. Keeping strategy a secret because it's not yet finished. That's a good one. We'll definitely be talking about that. Alignment, not taking time to get organization aligned. Management finds it complicated. That's an interesting problem. Selecting relevant and appropriate metrics. Oh, you already talked about that. It's interesting that so many struggles are the same. Like I said, some of these we'll actually be covering today. If we have time at the end, we will open the floor for questions and see if we can talk about any of these horrors that we don't cover today. So let's get started with the top 8 horrors that we have observed, and then come back to some of these others during the question and answer period at the end. We'll start by describing the top stories, and then we'll talk through the root causes and the solutions. The good news here is that many of these problems are completely avoidable if you approach strategic management in a systematic way. Gail, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Horror number 1 is called the spreadsheet seance. David, do you remember the client that you and I went out to try and help a couple years ago? Mm-hmm. The client had been given a spreadsheet from the parent company and told to deduce a balanced scorecard-based strategic management system. Basically, they're expected to try and deduce the corporate strategy from the metrics on the spreadsheet. It felt like we were performing a seance, trying to deduce the thoughts of others who were not present in the room. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Are we back now? Horror number 1, it really amounts to stripping strategy down to an Excel spreadsheet. Sending it out with some cryptic directions and giving people ridiculously short deadlines to fill in the blanks, or on how their division or their unit or their department will contribute to the organization-wide strategy. I refer to this as throwing the spreadsheet over the wall. Usually you're asked to submit measures, targets, initiatives, and yet you're giving nary a clue as to what the big picture strategy might be. If you hear my voice becoming stressed and tense right now, it's because this is a very common problem. And I'm the one here at the Institute that feels the please help me calls from people who see the word balanced scorecard or strategic management in the file name of the incoming spreadsheet, perform a frantic Google search, and call us for help. Just last week, I fielded a call like this from a bright, dedicated team, and they wanted very much to comply with the corporate directives, but they felt the spreadsheet was full of holes that wouldn't help them actually contribute as fully as their division potentially could to the corporation. My heart ached for them. I mean, they wanted to do the right thing, but that spreadsheet had them hogtied.
Hogtied? Is that like Texan for limited in options?
Sorry, David. Yes, thanks for the translation. And I'm sorry, people, but a spreadsheet of metrics does not communicate strategic intent. No one can look at a metric and understand the full scope of what the organization is trying to accomplish and figure out how they can contribute. In fact, many employees never even realize that the spreadsheet has anything to do with strategy. They think it's an exercise in developing measures. I once trained a gentleman whose company had used a balanced scorecard for years and years. He came to class, and at the end of the very first day, he came up to me, and he just sat a look on his face. He said, all these years, I filled out that spreadsheet, and I had no idea it had anything to do with strategy. Just imagine how much more my division could have contributed if I'd understood what was behind the spreadsheet.
Okay, so if horror number 1 is the spreadsheet seance, horror number 2 is actually a well-documented medical condition that many organizations suffer from called measurophobia. This is a horrifying situation for an organization to be in where no one wants to actually measure anything. Gail, what are the causes of measurophobia?
Well, there are actually many different causes of measurophobia. One is when teams go catatonic when trying to measure something intangible. They're told to measure something like culture, innovation, loyalty, leadership, engagement. I mean, how do you measure that? Another is caused when they're told to find a measure or set a target without being given any context for the measure. And for example, just yesterday, someone called and asked me, how do other people measure productivity? I felt sorry for them. I mean, they'd been told to come up with a measure of productivity, but they had no context in which to do it. I mean, seriously? Well, I can think instantly of a dozen ways to measure productivity. I have no way to assess if any of the ways I know are meaningful within the strategic context at this organization. I mean, what kind of productivity would be vital to their strategy? Are we talking about quality, throughput, cost reductions, waste, individual productivity, sales productivity, supply chain productivity? What? I mean, people think there's like some magic spell book out there somewhere that lists the perfect measure. but they are missing a key criteria for actually choosing a metric out of this magic book. It's like knowing that I'm a great cook, so you call me up and say, hey Gail, quick, give me a recipe. For what? For a cocktail? For an entree? What are you going to use for cooking equipment? Do you have a gourmet kitchen or a cauldron over an open fire? You know, are you cooking a dinner for 2 or a feast for 100? In other words, what is the context and objective for the recipe? I know lots of recipes, I know lots of measures, but in either situation, handing you something random won't necessarily help you.
Yeah, there's another common cause for measurophobia. That's when people are afraid of being punished for bad news. I once told someone in the airport that I was a balanced scorecard consultant, and the guy said that he lost his job once because of the balanced scorecard. He said that the communication company that he worked for based their quarterly layoffs on the balanced scorecard measurement system, and so if you didn't hit your numbers, you were let go. You know, it was a horrifying place to work, and the measures were useless because so many people spent so much of their time trying to game the system that the data was completely unreliable. Gail, do you want to tell us about horror number 3?
Horror number 3 is the opposite of the last one. It's when organizations are actually really good at measuring stuff, or they hire a software firm to populate a system with every measure they can drum up. And the metrics in their strategic management system multiply like rabbits. I met with an organization once that had thousands of strategic metrics, and they couldn't figure out why their strategy execution had stalled, why people were confused by and just ignored the system. David, you have a lot of experience with this, don't you?
Sure. Yeah. One utility I worked for told me that due to different regulatory requirements, they had almost 100 different metrics that they were all designed to tell them basically whether or not the power was on. It was an overwhelming amount of work just to maintain them, and yet none of them really helped them to make better decisions.
So, David, what is horror number 4?
Horror number 4 is a secret.
The horror is a secret.
No, actually, it's when the scorecard system itself is a system. Oh, sorry. The system itself is a secret. We refer to this as the uncover agent horror. There's usually 2 varieties of this horror that I've seen. The most common is when you have an executive leader who wants to get this done in a hurry, and so they build a scorecard on their own or with only the top 2 or 3 executives. They sometimes even implement the scorecard without any input from anyone else in the organization. I spoke to one CEO who had used the scorecard for almost 2 years on his own without his organization even knowing it. You know, needless to say, that wasn't very helpful for the organization. The second variety of the undercover agent horror is when you have a team of planners or analysts who want to build a scorecard, but they don't have support of upper management. Instead of building that support, they just try to sneak the system into place under the radar. You know, I spoke to some folks at a large organization at one point. They had the process improvement department wanted to build and implement a strategic performance measurement dashboard system, but they didn't have the support of management or even the strategic planning and management office. They managed to get all the pieces in place, but when they were done, they wondered why no one was using it. So it ended up just being a big waste of time. Horror number 5 is a common problem that we see from time to time called system disintegration. This is when the moving gears of the strategic management system rust and wear out over time. Organizations that are really good at this will often say that it runs like a well-oiled machine. You know, strategy becomes ingrained in their culture and embedded in their business processes. This horror happens when people stop working together to make the system work. When it happens, it can lead to disaster.
Yeah, this is sadly true. The most awful story I have to tell about this is when a human resource specialist called us up a few months ago. She was so frustrated. She worked for a large organization, and her job was to help people develop their annual individual performance goals. Now, these goals were based on the targets on the organization's balanced scorecard. So every year, the individual targets kept being raised, and she said, how much higher can we possibly ask people to jump? Where's the end of the madness? Well, we, of course, knew that to get to the root of the problem, we should talk to the people who actually own the balanced scorecards and knew something about the targets, so we asked to speak to someone in the strategy office. And this frustrated her all the more. She said, why on earth would you want to talk to someone in that department? This is an HR problem. It turns out that at one time this organization was running like a well-oiled machine, and that all the related processes and systems were designed to align the organization around strategy execution. But then somehow strategy formulation became decoupled from the HR portion of the strategic management system.
Gail recently wrote a blog about number 6 on our list. Gail, do you want to explain that nasty smell coming from the fridge?
Sure. What this slide refers to is that sick feeling that people get sometimes after using their strategic management system for a while. In the beginning, things are going great, but then somewhere along the way, it loses something. We call this strategy spoilage. People use terms like, it leaves a bad taste in our mouths, or it feels like an anchor weighing us down, or it feels boring, old, and stale. These are statements that are all warning signs, of course, warning that something has gone awry during strategy execution. Only in this case, is that the organization has unconsciously changed their strategic direction, or they're reacting to things in their environment, but they never stepped back and purposely updated their strategy and the integrated strategic management system. So the things in the system, the objectives, the measures, the initiatives, the targets, they're all outdated, hence the bad smell. Have you ever opened your fridge and gotten a whiff of something really gross? I mean, you cringe whenever you open it, just hoping someone else will clean it out. Similarly, people develop an aversion to the strategic system when it's actually the items in the system which are outdated. David, this is one of your pet peeves, no pun intended. Do you want to explain why this sweet little rat is doomed to run on this wheel into perpetuity?
Sure. It's actually a hamster. But yeah, this horror is called the Strategic Planning Wheel of Doom. This is where the strategic management team begins the strategy formulation and planning process, and then are never heard from again, if you know what I mean. They wordsmith the mission statement, the vision statement for weeks. They argue for months about the SWOT analysis. They change strategic themes 4 times. They refine the strategy map over and over and over, and they never really move on. I talked to a student from one of our classes over a year after the class to see how things were going, and she told me a long story about how they were still debating the exact wording of objective number 9. I asked her if they had reached their targets on any key measures, and she said that they were still tweaking the measurement data definition tables. And so, they were trapped on the wheel of doom for a year. And so, yes, this is truly a horrifying pet peeve of mine.
Horror number 8 is the scariest one of all. It's actually a death knell for any strategic management system. David, would you like to explain?
Sure. Horror number 8 is called ghostly leadership. Ghostly leadership takes a couple of different forms. Sometimes leadership assigns the development of a scorecard system to a team and tells them to, just go do it. Usually leaders like this are too busy, so to speak, to participate in major decisions. And then after the system is developed, that disengaged leader can't seem to get their head around the strategy. They don't understand the system. They don't understand what their role is supposed to be. They can't lead the organization. They can't lead the execution of the strategy. One CEO I worked with was completely supportive of the system in the abstract, but as soon as the organization was ready to begin executing the strategy, he presented the team with a list of 121 initiatives that he had come up with on his own. He expected them to implement those initiatives in addition to implementing the balanced scorecard. Now, if you talked to this guy, you would have thought he was completely supportive, but in reality, he didn't really understand the system well enough to see how much damage he was doing to the execution of their strategy. Another version of the ghostly leadership is when the leader is involved and supportive, but is replaced by someone who has no interest in using the strategic management system. The new person will simply throw all that good work out and start over with something new that they're more comfortable with. So that's what we mean by ghostly leadership. If they're involved at all, it's in spirit only. It's not, it's not visible or meaningful.
Okay, let's get some feedback.
Wait, you're
I have a gremlin again?
Yes, the headset horror. Okay, start over. It's gone.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get some feedback. As we review the horrors, everyone please write in your question box how many of these 8 horrors you've actually seen or experienced. Just type in a number from 0 to 8. So if you've seen 3 of them in your experience, just put the number 3 in the box. All right, so horror number 1, spreadsheet seance. That's where a team has to try to conjure up strategy from a metrics spreadsheet. Number 2, measurophobia, where for one of several reasons no one wants to measure anything. Number 3, metrics gone wild, is the opposite problem, where measures reproduce like rabbits to the point that all that data is not useful. Number 4, undercover agent, is where someone wants to implement a system in secret. Number 5, system disintegration, is when the gears in your well-oiled machine break down over time. Number 6, strategy spoilage, is where you fail to update your system to reflect changes in strategy. Number 7, the wheel of doom, is where you never quite get out of the system design phase and actually start using it. And finally, number 8, ghostly leadership, is when leadership fails to fully engage in the process. Oh my.
Yeah. Looks like Don, Raj, Margie, Brent, lots of number 8.
And the 8 plus help me! Exclamation marks.
John has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Oh, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8.
4s. Mark has 2. David and Alan have 4. The undercover agent. Brent has 2, 7, and 8. Janine 3. Ashish 3. David 7.
Lots of 8s.
Yeah.
3, lots of 3s. Metrics gone wild.
Yeah, metrics gone wild.
Wow.
Joe, help me.
Help me, I know. Measurophobia, metrics gone wild, wheel of doom, not mature enough here to have strategy spoilage yet.
5 of the stories. Ken 6. Vinny, number 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8. So it looks like we are touching on a lot of nerves here.
7 out of 8. Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very good. All right. So before we go any further, we want to make it clear to our audience that of all 8 of these problems, they are actually avoidable. You know, after 15 years of experience, the Institute has seen just about every strategic management issue you can dream up. You know, and our framework helps steer you clear of these problems. You know, we love to help organizations implement holistic systems while navigating around and avoiding these challenges and issues. One of the keys here is to realize that strategic planning and execution is a process. Just like any other process, the results you get will depend on the design and the implementation of that process. You know, most of the horror stories we see can be traced back to an organization that is not following a disciplined process like the 9 steps to success.
So avoidance is ideal. That statement reminds me of a scary movie when you want to yell at the character on the screen, "Don't open that door!" But you know they're going to do it anyway. So for those of you who followed a different process or framework and find yourself in one of these 8 challenges or apparently more, don't despair. We have some tips and solutions for you.
All right, so the horror number 1 was the spreadsheet seance. Gail, do you want to share with us a simple solution to this common problem?
Yes, thank you. When we are finally able to speak to the people in charge of corporate strategy who generate and use these spreadsheets,
Wait, Gail.
they're usually... Am I back?
Yeah, you're
Gremlin again?
Yeah, the gremlin's back.
Okay, is it gone now?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. When we get a hold of the people at corporate who generate these spreadsheets, they're usually surprised to find out how frustrating they are to use. It's not the tool itself. I mean, the spreadsheet creators were actually trying to keep things simple and clean, and I respect that. But in doing so, they strip the context and the purpose out of the measures. So we show them how to put together a simple package and story to communicate. You can communicate the corporate strategy, showing the cause and effect linkages of the objectives and underlying measures by using a strategy map like you see on the screen here. But when you send the whole package, be sure to share the strategic intent of the objectives on the strategy map by sharing the objective commentary and the intended results for each objective. Okay, so when you send the whole package of supporting documentation for the resultant spreadsheet of measures, you avoid the need for a seance to deduce the strategic intent of that spreadsheet. And this little change results in a big aha moment. Because you know what? Most humans communicate with words and pictures, not numbers. So strategic alignment is not achieved by filling in measurement blanks on a spreadsheet. Strategic intent is not communicated through a list of measures and targets. When you make this little adjustment, you not only end up with more meaningful and useful measures on the spreadsheet, but you actually get the added benefit of people understanding the underlying strategy and how they can contribute, which means tighter alignment up, down, and across the organization, which is critical for strategy execution. People really do want to contribute, guys, and they're motivated to help. Don't hog tie them with the spreadsheet.
All right, so there are several known treatments for measurophobia, depending on which variety you have. Difficulty measuring intangibles is cured by articulating the intended results of your strategy in simple, measurable terms. Weasel words are not allowed. Weasel words are the poorly defined ideals that strategists like to use that are too vague to measure. You know, phrases like innovation or leadership or sustainability or efficiency, productivity or effectiveness. I mean, I could go on and on. These measures are often mean different things to different people, and so they need to be clearly defined using simple, plain language before helpful measurements can be identified. The second recommendation is to make sure that you're not punishing people for bad news. You know, bad news should be informing your decisions. It helps you better understand where you need to be focusing your attention and resources. So don't punish people for shining a light on something important, or else they'll just simply stop sharing. Also remember that there's no such thing as a perfect measurement. Just because a measurement isn't perfect doesn't mean that you can't learn from it. You know, the value of measurement is to reduce uncertainty around performance. And then finally, measurement is a process that requires certain skills to be done well. That doesn't mean that every employee needs to be a certified expert, but it does require a basic understanding. You know, that basic understanding is easier to create if everyone in your organization is using a consistent measurement philosophy or measurement methodology.
So some of the same techniques that David just described that work for measurophobia also will work to solve measures gone wild. Using a disciplined process to decompose strategies step by step into its actionable components called strategic objectives will force you in discipline regarding how many measures you actually end up with. And the discipline of using those intended results David described as the words to bridge the gap between objectives and measures will further help tame those bunnies. The most disciplined organization I've seen had over 13,000 employees.
Gail, your gremlin is back.
My gremlin is back.
Okay.
Give it a moment. Is it gone?
Yeah.
Okay, what was I talking about? The organization they had 13,000 employees, guys, but they managed to boil their system down to 9 objectives with 1 measure each. That is 9 measures. 9. Management uses these 9 measures to ensure the organization is achieving its long-term strategy.
All right, so the first step in solving the mystery of the uncovered agent is to recognize that there's a problem. The challenge in Balanced Scorecard is not for the CEO to design an academically pure scorecard on his own. The challenge is getting employees to embrace it and to use it. The basic solution here is to use a process that is designed to maximize involvement in the process. I mean, there's no one right answer, but we recommend and teach a team structure that incorporates many people along the way. You also have to realize that employees are much more likely to support and use a system if they help build it. And then finally, you have to realize that this is much more about change, or it's as much about change as it is about measurement or even strategy. Change is enabled when employees are involved and equipped, and when they see visible commitment to change. In terms of the system disintegration, just as you must maintain, any machinery, you must also perform regular maintenance on the gears within your strategy management system. The way to be sure the gears are greased is to embed training on the system. Training shouldn't be limited to everyone's individual role, but it should also encourage an understanding of the whole system and why the pieces fit together the way they do. This should be built into every new hire training session at various levels of the organization. It's important that everyone understands that actions should be driven by objectives, which in turn are driven by high-level strategy.
Okay, so the frustrated human resource employee that I told you about?
Your gremlin.
Gremlin.
Yeah, sorry.
Boo, go away. Is it gone?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the frustrated HR employee that I mentioned earlier, she was taught to set targets, but she was never taught why the targets were being set. She was never taught what they link to, beyond incentive pay, of course, or how they supported the strategy execution of the organization. She wasn't taught what other departments owned linking pieces of the system, or even why her job function mattered to the big picture strategy of the organization. And that's a shame, because it's so easily avoided or repaired through systematic training and development programs. In the evaluation step of our framework, organizations assess how well their system is working. This includes evaluation of how well employees understand the system, how well they understand the strategy itself, and how well they understand and embrace their role in strategy execution. And this type of assessment unearths system disintegration long before the organization engine seizes up, while there's still time to perform basic maintenance.
The system assessment that Gail mentioned is just one part of the evaluation step of our framework. In order to avoid the strategy spoilage horror, the organization should also undergo regular and periodic evaluations of strategic performance to determine if any changes in strategy are needed. The strategy of the organization might change over time depending on shifts in the current macro or micro environment. If you hear employees compare your system to a boat anchor or lead boots or rotten fish or spoiled milk or something like that, there's a good chance that you are working with an expired strategy. On the screen is a sample meeting agenda for a periodic strategy review session. We recommend one of these at least once a year, more frequently in fast-moving industries or when the organization is working in an unstable environment.
So David mentioned that I wrote a blog about this.
Yeah.
Every time I start up.
Yeah.
How are we better now?
Better.
Okay. So David mentioned that I wrote a blog about this topic. It was based on an organization who called me. They were a United States healthcare organization, and their strategy was about 4 years old. Now, their strategy had been focused on preparing for potential changes regarding healthcare in the United States. They had no way of knowing then which party would win, and so they were in an unstable environment at the time. But if you guys have been keeping up with U.S. news, the Affordable Care Act is here. So about 18 months ago or so, this organization started focusing really hard on the triple aim tenets associated with the Affordable Care Act. So basically, their strategic direction had shifted dramatically due to an outside force, new legislation, but their strategic management system, or technically the items within the system, the objectives, the metrics, the initiatives, had not been refreshed. They were way outdated, expired like old milk. So when your system develops that off smell, step back and see if the items within it need refreshing.
So blaming it on the strategic management system would be like blaming the refrigerator when all you really need to do is replace the milk.
Exactly. So David, how do you get off that strategic planning wheel of doom?
Well, my first recommendation is to set a deadline. In other words, if you start your strategic planning effort on September 1st, set a deadline of, say, October 31st or something along those lines. On that date, we all agree that we will no longer wordsmith strategy, but we will instead discuss our performance results. We won't have to have the entire system done, but we will have at least a couple of important measures in place so that we can discuss how we're performing versus our strategic objectives. The second thing is that is critical to remember is that you know the old expression, perfect is the enemy of good. None of this is written in stone. This is an iterative process, and so implementing an 80% solution quickly is better than drawing out the process trying to create a perfect system. It's easier to maintain momentum if you can maintain high energy and move quickly. The third recommendation is to just keep it simple. Remember, you can't do everything for everyone. Be a brutal minimalist at each step along the way to keep the number of objectives and the number of measures down. Then when you start executing strategy, focus on just a few key, focus areas to start. Focus on improving 1 to 3 processes. So the things that will be driving, the highest priority gaps in your performance. Finally, it seems like common sense, for people that are good with action items, but some folks are so intimidated by long-term projects that they never really get going. That they literally don't know where to start. For those of you that struggle with that, the first step is to take those long-term, complex initiatives and break them down into shorter-term tasks, and then get started on the first task.
Is the gremlin gone?
It is.
We mentioned that ghostly leadership is pretty much a death knell. This is one of the hardest challenges to overcome. In fact, thanks to the bruises that we've suffered in this particular school of hard knocks, we now insist on a private meeting with the top leader of any organization before we'll even start work as consultants to assess if they truly understand what their organization is about to develop and implement. And we insist on their pledge to participate and affirm that this is their choice, their chosen system, that they wish to use it to manage the organization going forward. If we can't be sure that they have an understanding and are giving us their commitment, we won't do the work to help them build the system because failure is almost completely assured. I mean, this leadership engagement check is part of the program launch portion of our framework.
But what if someone is already well down the path before they realize that leadership is not on board? Or the situation we mentioned earlier in which the leadership was on board, but now they have a new leader who doesn't embrace the strategic management system?
Honestly, at this point, your best hope is to use basic leadership psychology and change management techniques to try and understand their resistance issues. Use language that activates whatever is making them fearful, and then use education to alleviate the fears. I mean, we're talking about basic sales and marketing techniques as well here. I mean, what I mean is that assuming your leader is at least interested enough to meet with you or someone they trust, they can be educated about the benefits of using the integrated strategic planning and management system to execute their vision and their strategy for the organization. By showing them how it will help with some of the things that are currently keeping them up at night, you may start to get their attention. You can also put them in contact with other leaders who are successfully using such systems to achieve breakthrough results. Someone they respect, so they can understand that this isn't some radical new thing or something peculiar to your organization. It's good, solid business practice. And remember that some executives haven't received much training over the years as they've worked their way up the ladder, and a lack of knowledge is a common root cause for resistance. It's fear-based. So your first job will be to understand their reason for resistance.
We also want to point out that you can get ahead of the curve if you anticipate a change in leadership. One of the things we recommend is to include knowledge of, or at least openness to, your framework as part of the criteria for selecting new leaders. So it's built into their job qualification description. There should also be training provided immediately for new leaders to teach them the system and to familiarize them, with the current strategy.
We also recommend some succession planning so that should a position stay vacant, another executive slides into the leadership role for the strategic management system, so there's no break in the continuity of strategy execution. So in case anyone on the line is in this situation, I saw a lot of people putting 8s out there. Let's go over some key benefits that you might use to communicate with these reticent leaders. Why should they want to use this system that's already in place versus doing things their way and staying in their own comfort zone?
Your gremlin crept in there at the end, by the way.
I'll wave my magic wand. Is he gone?
It is.
Okay. All right, so the slide you see on your screen, it has a list of benefits, but these can also be looked at in the reverse as like the things that keep leaders up at night. So the first three are all very important to a new leader. So if you get a new leader in your organization, they want to get the exec team working together, demonstrate and set the tone for their leadership, and implement initiatives. What I mean is, the first thing a leader wants to do is understand that the organization as a whole, they want to understand how it works. They want to ensure that their executive team is highly functioning as a team, and they want to establish the tone of their leadership, as well as make their mark with big initiatives and transformational change decisions. And they often don't realize that the strategic management system is actually designed specifically to expedite these exact things, or how it does so. They simply need to be educated. The next one is, we called it breakdown silos. Sometimes departments, regions, divisions, they tend to operate in silos, and in doing so, they end up missing opportunities for synergies, for innovation, for new ideas, and for company-wide improvements and growth. An integrated strategic planning and management system, by its very nature, breaks down these silos, enables cross-functional collaboration and communication via the alignment mechanisms. The next one is the ability to communicate their vision and strategy. Sometimes leaders have a very clear vision and strategy in their heads, and they think the staff must surely understand it because, the leaders made speeches about it. But in actuality, most people, even their top staff, don't fully understand the desired direction. The leader will actually benefit by using the system to communicate clearly to employees and stakeholders. Another benefit is improved employee motivation. I mean, let's be honest.
Gail, bought a gremlin.
Now?
That's better.
Is he gone?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, folks. Thank you for your patience. Motivation. Most people, if you think about it, they're really not inspired necessarily to come to work just to perform a prescribed job function. Most people want to be on a winning team. Okay, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and an integrated system does amazing things for employee motivation. I mean, just amazing. Well, now let's talk about competing. Whether you're competing for customer sales or for funding or to satisfy stakeholders, your leader's probably spending some time worrying about how to do that more effectively. An integrated strategic management system ensures that you're looking at your game plan on a regular basis and are executing aligned strategies to compete and, more importantly, to win. Okay, and we can't forget about that dashboard of meaningful measures. Even though an organization measures hundreds, if not thousands, of things operationally, I mean, what are the critical 10 to 20 measures that are necessary for a leader to keep his or her finger on the pulse of the organization and to make informed decisions? Okay, and here's my favorite, last but not least. Organizations are having to adapt and change more and more quickly these days, to be more nimble, to be more agile. And having an integrated system enables you to actually steer and guide the organization to new directions, to turn on a dime, if you will. And for a new leader, this is the most important benefit of using the system. I mean, they've been brought on board to guide and steer the organization. Why would they reject taking over the controls of their own ship? Okay, so now what? We're going to get to a Q&A session in just a second, but if you are struggling with any of these horrors or others and you need help avoiding them altogether, we're here to help. I want to let you know we do offer a full range. Yes?
Your gremlin is back.
Boo?
Yeah.
Gone?
Yes.
Okay. We do offer a full range of consulting services. So whether you just want to get on the phone and talk through it with an expert with some advisory services, or if you want to have a team come in and help you with your whole system, we're here to help. Our consulting approach, though, is teaching-based. So while we're there helping you as a consultant, we also help build your internal capacity to continue on yourself.
Or another way that an organization can stay clear of these horrors is by developing the skills they need to facilitate their own organizations through the process. We have 2 levels of certification offered through our partnership with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies, the Balanced Scorecard Master Professional and the Balanced Scorecard Professional. You can learn to avoid all of these strategic management horrors by mastering the 9-step process we use to develop and implement a strategic management system. Or if your organization is suffering from measurophobia or metrics gone wild or any other performance measurement ailment, we now also offer the PUMP Performance Measure Blueprint certification through our partnership with Stacy Barr. This course zeroes in on the specific process steps you need to follow to get the most out of your performance measurement system, from measurement development to performance analysis to performance reporting, etc. We now offer our courses all over the world through a network of international affiliates. You can find all those courses on our website. Here in the U.S., we still have a few more offerings from 2013. We have a boot camp in Atlanta, Georgia, November 4th through the 8th. We have a PUMP class also in Atlanta the week after that. Then we have a Balanced Scorecard Master Professional Application course in Alexandria, which is in the D.C. region, November 4th through the 8th. And we have a boot camp in Alexandria on December 9th.
And if you haven't heard already, we've
Wait,
actually
Gail?
published...
Try again.
Testing.
Better.
Okay, if you guys haven't heard already, we published a book. It's called The Institute Way, Simplify Strategic Planning and Management with the Balanced Scorecard, which is available on our website at the link you see on your screen or from Amazon. This book outlines the practical step-by-step process to formulate and execute strategy in any type of organization. It includes the 9 steps to success framework, of course, that we've mentioned today, but it contains many more challenges and solutions, as well as real-life examples from many, many of our clients. So now we'd like to open the floor to questions. Please write your questions in the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try to get to many of these as we can. Oh wow, they're already pouring in. Remember, with as many registrants as we have, we may not be able to get to everyone. If we do not get to your question, or if you'd like us just to follow up with you, please contact us at the address that you see on your screen.
One questioner says the process sounds like a big organization process. My organization has only 80 employees. How applicable is the Balanced Scorecard to small organizations like ours? That's a really good question. We've worked with organizations 10, 20,000, and we've worked with organizations as small as 7 employees. We worked with an organization in Washington, D.C. that only had 7 people in one small office. It really is a scalable system. It really doesn't matter the size of the organization. I actually think the challenges might be on the other end. If you've got 20,000 employees scattered all over the planet, this system it's a little bit more of a challenge to implement.
Trying to read these as they flow by. Just how specific should a vision statement be? That's an excellent question. Well, the vision statement, of course, is a picture of your future, an agreed upon picture of your future it's a transformational vision, if you will. It should be inspiring and short. So as far as specificity, if it's inspiring and short, but you can't tell from it what the destination really looks like, how to know you're there, we recommend something called an overarching strategic result be associated with that, which is a statement that has more of a time-bound goal associated with it that will help you communicate the vision.
Jason, did you see the one about the communication grave? Jason he translated it into a horror. What about the communication grave? Lack of communication of the scorecard. We incorporate communications into our framework and all of our training because it really is critical that you that you share you share what you're doing with the entire organization, and you do it in a systematic manner. I mean, we have a communications workshop that we deliver, that we identify key messages and key audiences, and talk through specifically how to communicate what this is about, what is the Balanced Scorecard for, and why are we doing it? Why are we doing it now? Try to address people's fears and things like that. It's very important.
How do you resolve executive team members' entrenchment in their silos without looking at the big picture? Excellent question. David mentioned I believe it was undercover agent solution. To use teams, we actually work with, the way the silos are broken down is working with teams to build the strategy. So we would bring people from all parts.
There you go.
Yes. Okay, bring people from all parts of the organization, executive from all parts of the organization, to agree collectively on the strategy for the entire organization. That's an important step. I mean, if you have strategy being created somewhere at home office and just being shipped out to the different parts of the organization, then their voices have not been included in developing strategy, therefore they will stay in their silos.
Pablo asks, KPIs should be cascaded to the individual level at risks of going wild. I mean, that's a really good point, Pablo. We do encourage our organizations to cascade, meaning they translate what you create on the tier 1 level down to the department level and create scorecards on that level, and then later cascading that down to the individual level, or at least the team level. The key is that each scorecard is managed on its own and doesn't have an overabundance of measures on their own. That one person, that single individual with their supervisor, are talking about a couple of measures on their own. The CEO or the executive team level, they are not thinking about hundreds and hundreds of measures on a daily basis. That's the key.
Here's one from the nonprofit sector. When a nonprofit is in a transformational and rebranding mode, how do you bring leadership, board, and all stakeholders into the process through this approach? This would be in step 1 and 2 of our process. If you get the book, this will probably make more sense. Let's see whose name that is. But up front, you either, and I understand when you're talking about volunteers, volunteer stakeholders, and board members, you can't exactly get them all together for a couple of days to set strategy, but you can get their voices involved. We usually do this through focus groups or short burst type sessions where we're looking for specific outputs from them, so specific guidance from them that will guide strategy, and then you close the circle by coming back to them when you've developed the next piece. Yes, back now?
Yep. Okay. I think it goes away when I speak sometimes, actually.
Oh, well, you're the gremlin. Problem solved. Okay. All right. So then you circle back around. So, for example, you would have them have input into maybe what your differentiations are, or what your vision is, or what they see as enablers or challenges for you. And then those are inputs in the process. The output, of course, would be strategic themes and results. And then you take those back and get in for validation. So you keep circling back around as appropriate.
Okay, Brent asks, does the big data movement risk fueling metrics gone wild? I would say yes and no. Yes, in that it encourages people to go out and look for transactional data that can be used in a predictive manner. You know, if I can look at credit card transactions and try to predict, how spending habits, or make better advertising decisions, that sort of thing, it does seem to encourage you to be doing a lot more measurements. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't encourage you necessarily to use those measurements in your balanced scorecard or in your strategic planning. When you're doing data analytics, you're simply looking for patterns, and you're looking for things that will predict what's going to happen tomorrow. They're not necessarily indicators that you're going to be using for performance management. I hope that makes sense.
Prior to my arriving, my organization's previous plan had 250 strategic activities, much of which were tactical. How do I convince top leaders that we don't need that? This becomes about the education process, showing them how an integrated system is supposed to work and how by focusing on strategic initiatives, it's easier to manage. Now, there are tactical things that you still need to do, but usually those can fall in the operational areas of the organization, and the executive team don't need to be reviewing this humongous list, because then they're down in the weeds talking about tactics versus looking at a higher level at outcomes. Are you actually achieving what you've set out to achieve? Are you actually transforming? Are you achieving your vision? Those discussions should be around, the metrics themselves, the performance, the strategic performance. Are you actually making progress? And then you only dive down and look at initiatives when you're looking at underlying drivers of performance. And 250 tactics is a lot to be looking at.
Kenneth asks, how do you handle opinion leaders who stand in the way of strategy and balanced scorecard way of doing things? Well, that's a good question. I was facilitating once, and I showed up on day one, and there was a VP who was not coached in advance as to what the session was going to be about. And he expected that the team was going to get together and prioritized initiatives. That's all he wanted to do. And he found out when he showed up that we were going to be building a balanced scorecard and doing strategic planning, and he was very upset, very resistant. He was waving his finger in my face and, really making a big deal about it. And so the answer that I really worked on for weeks with this person was to engage them. You really have to engage. This person was passionate about what they were trying to do, passionate about the organization. He just had a very strong opinion about how to get there, and so I had to incorporate his opinion into the conversation, and to make sure that the things that were valuable or important to him were at least on the agenda. We talked through them, we incorporated it into the scorecard, and I got to admit, by the end of the 8 weeks that we were there, this person was on board and really, became a champion for the process, because he saw how the system could work, to further the things that he was particularly interested in.
Management is too inconsistent. What do you recommend when upper management agrees to one aspect, the item is written and agreed upon, then a month later a manager says they did not agree upon the aspect? This ranges from the mission through initiatives. Oh, Lord. We do a short review for each meeting, but some keep rewriting history and contradicting themselves. This sounds like the Wheel of Doom, David.
Right.
What do you do? Well, as David mentioned, setting targets and deadlines, if you will, by thus and such a date we're going to begin execution, looking at performance, implementing initiatives, getting them to agree to that can help. But also you seem to have an underlying problem here in terms of leadership engagement. If you have a very strong leader, I don't know what kind of organization you are, but the president, the CEO, someone at the top of the organization who wants to use this as the management framework, they can help you put a stop to this. So the question is, are they really engaged and want to use this, or is this just an activity where they're kind of kicking the can down the road? So that's the question. Does your organization really want this system in place?
Philip asks, when in the 9-step process do you introduce automation? Let me see if I can come back to that slide. We introduced the automation in the performance analysis step 7. As a matter of fact, this step, years back, that step was actually called automation. You build the scorecard during the first 6 steps. You have the Tier 1 scorecard developed, and then you roll it out, and then you automate it. You put it in software system. In some larger organizations, you might have a long procurement process in which you will have the conversations earlier than that. But the step 7 is where you want to implement it. Basically, before you begin the alignment step, before you begin cascading and building scorecards throughout the entire organization, you really want to have a software system in place.
How dynamic should your strategy be to ward against and mitigate against regular changes in regulations? That's a good question. It's not necessarily the strategy that's dynamic, it's how frequently you review the strategy. I mean, that's where strategy spoilage comes into play. You know, at least quarterly you should be looking at strategic performance, and one of the questions we like to ask is this the right strategy? And if our strategy isn't performing well, is it because it's not the right strategy or some pieces of it aren't correct? But at least once a year you should step back and look at the whole system. And looking at the environment, the macro environment, the micro environment, has anything changed? And that would include the regulations. And therefore, do we need to react and adjust our strategy to these changes? I'm not sure how dynamic your environment is, the questioner here, but I hope that helped.
We've got a federal agent, John, a federal agency attendee. We're not in competition with like organizations, but our model for what we do is working very well. Have you seen a measure that depicts advocacy? We've actually worked with a lot of organizations that advocacy is really important. UNICEF, a few nonprofits. And generally, you have a conversation around what the intended result of the advocacy is. Usually you're trying to promote a cause, you're trying to promote knowledge around a certain topic, and so you'll have what I like to think of as the leading indicators that are like some of the activities that you're doing, and then the lagging indicators. What are you trying to get leaders to support a certain thing, or are you trying to get them to implement a certain law? If UNICEF was interested in working with states around the world, but with countries, could they get country organizations to implement laws that were favorable to the situation for children, for instance? So they would have advocacy activities that they would monitor. They'd monitor the outputs of those activities. They had some intermediate outcomes, like are the leaders receiving the message? Are they and then are they doing something with it? Are they actively promoting the cause? So there's a series of measures that you might have that would be related to advocacy.
When you're working in a small business, just a few dozen staff, everyone is in the weeds much of the time. How to keep them looking up towards the horizon where strategies can be found. This is a challenge. Every organization, people are busy fighting fires, no matter the size. And in a small organization, people wear a lot of hats, of course. So the best approach is to have a regularly scheduled meeting with a regular agenda where the purpose is not to necessarily fight fires, but to look up. And so some organizations do just a few objectives in each meeting and look at performance on those objectives. They'll have conversations around the environment, around, has anything changed? They'll look at strategic performance, but the meeting is specifically to discuss strategy. Are we achieving our strategy? If not, why not? Is this still the right strategy? And make those big picture choices. And we recommend those, like I said, at least once a quarter. And if you can, try not to let those meetings devolve into talking about specific tactics or firefighting problems. Try to keep focused strategically and set the expectation that this meeting is a strategic meeting.
Joe asks, executive management is culturally autocratic. Should I even suggest a balanced scorecard system? Well, that's quite a challenge. I am always game for trying to sell a leader on a more effective management. If culturally autocratic management techniques are sort of dated at this point, and so usually leaders are aware of that. They're aware of the problem, and they realize that they have sort of an old-fashioned management style. And so, you can usually make a case that if they were to change their ways, it would be more effective.
I think we may have answered most of the questions, David. They went by so fast, I'm not sure if I skipped a few. But.
Yeah, there's a few in here. Charles just asked it. There's a situation where members of staff do not trust the good intentions of management, in most cases due to the history of unsuccessful attempt and failure of other methodologies like management by objective. Yeah, you really have to be careful during the planning stages of this methodology. You have to make sure you don't have a series of false starts. The false starts can create distrust in the system itself. It's like, oh, they think, oh, this balanced scorecard is just a the phrase of the day. It's the flavor of the month. It's going to come and go. So you really have to plan out the program launch very carefully and make sure that you communicate what this is about. Make sure that you follow through. Make sure that you're aiming for some quick wins. Make sure that you're actually solving some pains in the organization. Make sure that you don't get stuck on the wheel of doom. The wheel of doom is the reason why people distrust the process. They think, oh, this is never going to amount to anything practical. So you have to make sure that it does. Just make a point of it. Set a deadline. Say on this date we're going to do something practical with this system. If it kills us, okay. So that's the way you fight that.
Oh, excellent question, Jim. The success stories you outline on your website are agencies and nonprofits. I don't see many large Fortune 500 companies. Why? Very good reason, actually. This is their strategy. Most companies don't publicize the details of their strategy. In writing the book, we profiled 5 of our clients. 2 of them are for-profit companies, one of them very, very large. And they took a lot of iterations with their public relations and legal. They're obviously not going to show all the parts of their system, but they're showing a lot more than usual, and those cases are available online. But that's the reason, this is the strategy of the organization. This is how they're going to compete and win. These are their objectives. These are the initiatives they're implementing, and they're simply not going to share that with the competition.
Then finally, Kenneth asked, how do we immobilize autocrats and be in the balanced scorecard environment? This goes back to Joe's question earlier. I mean, you really have to engage people, and immobilize. I wouldn't think of it as I want to keep that person out. You really have to think of it as how do I try to help this person transition to a less autocratic manner of managing. I mean, there's no easy answer to that. You have to help them understand the benefits, help them understand how the system is supposed to work, and try to help them work within the system. So it's all about trying to get everyone on the same page. All right, so I apologize if we skipped over anyone's questions. Again, just if you want to send us if we didn't get to your question, or if you think of something later, please just go to the go to the web address that's at the bottom of the screen and send us a note, and Gail and I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you for joining us today, and good luck to everyone for